Hey folks, this is Kalani. Patch 10.15 is almost here, just a little bit longer to wait, but that doesn't stop the dev team from squeezing in some massive nerfs just before patch day. We've got nerfs of up to 70% in some cases, which is pretty insane to drop right before everything goes live. There are some class changes, some big changes to the mega dungeon, there are new features being added in right before patch day, and we also have some more information about various community concerns. There's a lot to talk about, so let's break it all down. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with the class changes. Now I have to say there aren't as many as I expected for this last round of buffs and nerfs. Mages saw a few tweaks to Frost Mage, Frozen Touch was buffed up to grant Brain Freeze 20% more often, and Snowstorm will get buffed up to an 18% increase and 36% increase for the various ranks there, and then Splitting Ice also had Ebb and Bolt removed from its tooltip because, well, Ebb and Bolt was also removed entirely. The only other class with quick hotfix changes are the Holy Paladins. Veneration saw a quick buff up to 200% of damage done, and then there were some changes to Greater Judgment. The Absorb was reduced by 20%, but the Absorb shield can now crit. So just a couple last minute tuning changes before the big rework goes live. I'm honestly surprised that we didn't see more hotfixes this week. Usually the dev team squeezes in the last round of tuning changes just before the patch goes live with hotfixes, but maybe this time they got ahead of the balancing and they're happy with where they are earlier in the PTR cycle. That's a good sign in my opinion. Last minute buffs and nerfs are not ideal, but we could still see some hotfixes coming next week after the patch goes live. There are sure to be some outliers here and there that need to be reined in or buffed up to actually work, especially with the Holy Paladin and Mage reworks going live, so keep an eye out for those. Now the really big nerfs come through for the mega dungeon, the Dawn of the Infinite, that is a big part of patch 10.15. This was supposed to be a difficult small group progression option and the rewards are definitely up there. The gear drops at item level 437, can be upgraded to 441, and there are also various special effects that could make gear from the mega dungeon worth way more than what its item level would have you believe. There are also special cosmetic rewards and various achievements, so the mega dungeon is going to be very valuable for all kinds of players, but the difficulty may have been too high, I guess, because several bosses received some massive nerfs just before the patch goes live. In some cases, these nerfs take a boss from being very difficult to being a complete pushover, and that's how big some of these changes are. For example, the first boss, Chronocar, the boss's health was reduced by 25%, which is already a massive nerf for the difficulty of any encounter. When you have 25% health to go through, everything happens much faster and the fight is just shorter, but on top of that, Chrono sheer damage was reduced by 50%, and the heal absorb that it applies was also reduced by 70%. It used to be about 2.7 million, and that's been knocked down to about 800k. It does seem to be bugged right now though, so we'll see how the dust settles there when the servers go live. In addition to that, the Eon Fragments ability had its damage reduced by 50%, and you have longer to catch them so you won't have to rush around quite as much. Eon Residue damage was reduced by 67%, the cast time for Sandstomp was increased up to 4 seconds, and the damage taken increase on Sheared Lifespan was cut back down to 200% increase from 600%, and the Sand Pool damage was reduced by 50% for the impact, 40% for the damage you take while standing in the pool, and the pools will only last for 2 minutes instead of 4. With all of these nerfs combined, the boss is just going to be so much easier to kill. I'm not too surprised that the first boss got some nerfs, because it was quite difficult for being the very first boss you run into, but these nerfs seem very heavy-handed, especially if the dev team wants to try and keep the mega dungeon at that higher difficulty. That's not all though, the manifested Time Waste boss also saw some big nerfs. The accelerating time damage was reduced by 40%, the decaying time damage was reduced by 40%, and the fragments of time initial damage was reduced by 10%. Most of these abilities are constant group damage, so cutting 40% off their damage will make this encounter much smoother for your healers. And then the last boss also had some pretty big changes. Destroying the time rifts will deal 20% of the boss's health over time instead of 15%, so another 5% of health would just disappear from the boss per time rift you close. Phase 2 begins much later at 20% health, and the final phase starts at 10% health down from 20%. The later phases are essentially burn phases, so only having to get through 20% and 10% of the boss's health during those phases will also just make the encounter much easier, and hopefully you're not going to run out of room to drop the sand puddles. In addition to those nerfs, temporal breath initial damage and periodic damage were both reduced by 50%, so that ability straight up hits half as hard as it previously did. Infinite corruption puddles will appear slightly more often, but won't last as long, and then temporal scar puddles damage were actually increased by 30%, perhaps the only buff we've seen to the mega dungeon recently. With the patch release being so close and this many changes still coming through for the Mega Dungeon, I would actually expect to see more, and maybe even some patch day hotfixes if things end up being too easy or too difficult when the Mega Dungeon is finally available for everyone to play. If these nerfs stay in place for the most part, the dungeon will actually be quite a bit easier than we first anticipated. Moving on, we had quite a few different interviews this past week to prepare for the launch of 10.15 and give us some insight into what we could expect moving forward, but also answer some lingering questions from the community. One of the big topics of an interview with Wowhead and Ian Hazakostas was a rogue rework. In 10.15 it was announced that rogues were one of the classes next on the list to receive some big reworks. But in patch 10.15, only the mage specs and holy paladins really got that much attention, so what happened to the rogues? Well, they won't be getting a rework in 10.15 if that wasn't already apparent, but that doesn't mean they've been forgotten about. There just wasn't enough time to get that done before 10.15 needed to be shipped out, and the dev team is focusing more on delivering consistent content rather than holding an entire patch up just because one feature or aspect isn't quite ready. So we should actually see a rogue rework somewhere in the near future, which could either be 10.17 or maybe 10.2 depending on how much is already planned for the 0.7 patch. Ian also talked about a change coming to raid loot and how tier set tokens will drop in patch 10.15. In the past, the dev team have suggested we may see tier token drop rates decrease as the raid tier progresses. When you have all of your tier gear squared away, tier tokens start becoming dead gear drops essentially. If no one needs it but they take up a large part of your group's loot, you just have less chances to get everything else. Now that the catalyst is also in full swing with several charges active and ready to use, tier tokens don't really mean that much anymore, so in 10.15 they will drop less often. Apparently in a group of 20 players, 2 tier tokens would drop previously, now it's just going to be 1 tier token and the other 3 pieces of loot will be actual boss loot instead. This will give us a much higher chance of obtaining things like the class trinkets from Echo of Neltharion, or some of the rarer items like the cloak from Sarkarath. This is a great change for pretty much every raider because the catalyst can fulfill any tier set collecting requirements you may still have. Another major point that was made in a different interview was to re-emphasize that Trader's Tender will not be sold individually in the in-game cash shop. New icons for the Trader's Tender were data mined in various bundle sizes, and they very much look like graphics that would be used in a cash store environment. The only thing really missing here was a price tag, so naturally a lot of folks assumed the dev team might add Tender into the cash shop, which would basically ruin the entire premise of the trading post. Well, that is not going to be the case. According to Ian Hazakostas, Trader's Tender will not appear in the cash shop. The icons that were data mined may be used as part of a bundle or deluxe edition package later on to take the place, or maybe in addition to typical rewards such as mounts or pets. When the dev team include a pet in a bundle, you don't really get any choices there, but if they include Trader's Tender as part of a bundle, then you would have the option to buy whatever you want from the trading post. So that's definitely better than having Trader's Tender just available for purchase straight up in the cash shop. Apparently there are so many different icons for the Trader's Tender with varying amounts because whenever any kind of graphic like this is made, they just make a bunch of them all at once just in case they need them later on. Ian also made a point to say the community response of "we never want Tender available in the cash shop ever" has been heard loud and clear, so I doubt they'll ever consider that possibility going forward. It's not just future features and ideas to look forward to though. Some new features were actually added into the patch that no one really knew about. They just randomly popped up with the complete patch notes that were released just a couple of days ago. The main addition that I think is super cool is a change to how view distance and fog work in Kalimdor, and potentially some other older zones. These screenshots show you how impactful this change is going to be, and it's really going to change how the old world will look, especially for dragon riding. We'll get to dragon riding Kalimdor when the event comes around, but from what I understand, the general plan is to allow dragon riding everywhere eventually. So when that finally comes through, these view distance changes will be the icing on the cake to let you look way further than ever before. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about in this video is the next patch. 10.15 hasn't even hit live servers yet, but 10.17 is already set up to be deployed to the PTR realms. This content machine just doesn't stop, I guess. We don't have that much information about what 10.17 could include. If we take a look at the good old roadmap that has been updated a few times now, the latest info we have about 10.17 includes new story and quests, a holiday refresh, and content and systems updates. The release date is also supposed to be sometime in fall. That doesn't really tell us much, but I would fully expect this to be expanded upon when the PTR goes up. Every one of these patch previews on the roadmap has been way bigger than the first little glimpse, so we'll have to wait until the PTR gets updated to see exactly where Dragonflight will go next. But with 10.17 already having an encrypted build deployed to the vendor servers, we probably won't have to wait very long at all. So expect to see some updates from us about 10.17 in the next few weeks. But that's all of the updates we have to talk about this week, so that's it for this video. What do you think of the several Mega Dungeon bosses getting nerfed into the ground? Do you think the Mega Dungeon should be difficult to progress through or easier so more players get to experience it sooner? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you'd like to add your name to the end of every video with a special shout out at the start of the next video, you can find links in the description over to Patreon or click the join button just below this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.